I'm going to talk to you about why the media don't get money. And in order to do that, I just want to tell you who I am to keep you from an afternoon slumber, and as to why I might be relevant to this question. So I was with Reuters, the financial news agency, for 11 years, 94 to 2005. I started in Brussels. I was the EU environment correspondent, and I wrote about transport and energy and things like that. So this is to tell you that my arrival at questions of money and where it came from was slightly different to Victoria's there, for example, and also to Ben's. I listened to his Radio 4 thing this morning on the way in on the train. He became skeptical about economics as an undergraduate. I gradually became skeptical about journalism as a journalist. And so that happened through covering environmental issues. If you cover environmental issues and you're paying anything like some sort of attention, you come up again and again against the prospect of running the numbers on the story you're covering. And running the numbers on climate change takes you to a very nasty place. Running the numbers on biodiversity loss, similarly so, resource use. And so you start to have to develop a fairly hard shell or become a manic depressive. And so my early days at Reuters was sort of, this is strange, you know, I'm writing about things which are really quite alarming, quite a lot of things which are really quite alarming, and yet I write the stories, and I'm also chasing politicians around dealing with these stories, and no one seems to be very alarmed, and I found that alarming. So as a journalist, you know, journalism is my passion. I was thinking, okay, well, what's going wrong with journalism? Why, you know, where's the sort of disjunct here? So it was a perennial question. And I was in Brussels for 3.5 years, actually covering climate change negotiations as they sort of got off the ground after Rio in '92. And just as I was moving, as you do within an organization like Reuters, you do something for a few years, then you go to another assignment. I was assigned to London as the gold correspondent, precious metals, commodities. And just then, I'd been covering climate change, and I went to Kyoto to cover the global climate negotiations. And the European Union was quite progressive. I knew about the European Union, all the faces, so I covered what in Kyoto was a dirty compromise, but it was still quite an optimistic compromise. It wasn't perfect, but it was, for me as someone following these issues, it was quite comforting to see at a global level some sort of compromise and progress on clearly what was a problem. Even though, I mean, the US at the time under Clinton and Gore said yes and then came out. Journalistically, and what I wasn't writing, because it's very difficult to write, was it was very clear about the extent of fierce lobbying going on on the part of the oil and gas companies, the energy companies, and how the legal process was being undermined at every turn in Europe, but also globally, and you could see in other parts of the world. So I arrived in London as the gold correspondent with this sort of hinterland of environment, ideas such as climate change, ideas such as GDP not being a measure of anything sensible, and how it was concentrating on GDP growth was positively suicidal from a global environment perspective. And I come bang into London financial markets, sort of blinking. And my background is in, I did a mechanical engineering undergraduate degree, so I have a science background, and I have a sort of numbers background. So I arrived at financial markets thinking, okay, I know engineering, this can't be that difficult. And it was at the time where there was the Asian or developing country boom in financial markets, and then the subsequent and inevitable bust. And so I arrived when there was the Asian financial crisis beginning to gather steam, and the whole question of derivatives. And derivatives were a big issue for my job, my new job, as the bullion correspondent. So I had to learn derivatives. I had my environmental background, and leading on to the, because this story will continue, the second slide, it's at that time, the most important time of my Reuters career, why didn't I get money? So this is part, obviously, confessional. It feels good. So why didn't I get money? I didn't need to. You know, pragmatically on my job, as I was doing my job then, no one was asking me about money. I mean, Ben was only 12, for example, so he hadn't got going. But part of explaining the question that I'm charged to explain today, which is why media don't get money. So I didn't get it, clearly, but I didn't know that I didn't get it. No one was asking me to get it. And my day-to-day reporting was trying to work out what on earth a derivative was and why it mattered to gold. It was asking myself as a former environment correspondent how I could be writing about this metal, which I knew required sort of all sorts of nasty things to leach out, cyanide, and digging up huge, great holes in the ground for tiny, tiny amounts of metal, displacing indigenous people. It's an absurd business, the gold business. And that was my business. I had to talk to the people trading the stuff. They're human beings. Get to know them, get them to trust me as not about to sort of burn them because they were doing their business, and write every day about the gold market, why the price was going up, why it was going down, why that was important, and what would happen next, sort of thing. So that was my job. Why didn't I get money? As I say, I didn't need to. No one was asking me to. I had other things to do. My daily job was to report what the markets were doing. Nothing to do with money. And my client base, as it were, to use the word client for a journalist, the audience for my work, they were bankers, they were traders, they were financial analysts, they were hedge funds. These people don't want to hear a lecture about where money comes from. They just want to know where the price is going and if they're about to lose their shorts or they're going to get someone else's shorts. So that's the second slide. So why the media don't understand money? Those are the elements for me personally. Like with Victoria, I'm going to give you my subjective view on why the media don't get money. I can't give you a definitive answer because it's something that occupies people for days, months, acres of blog or newsprint to debate what's wrong with the media. So I'm giving you a totally subjective perspective here. I make no excuses for that. I don't believe there's such a thing as objectivity anyway. So I'm going to go through some of the reasons. These are some of the important ones. There will be others, and I'm sure you have them yourself. The health warning is this is not the truth. This is part of the truth as I see it. So, reason one, journalists are no smarter than the rest of us. You will all have your own stories to tell about how you came here today. There's a point in your trajectory which is money. Wow, yes, positive money, that's interesting. Wow, I knew about that, I didn't know about that. I think it was 60% this morning. Was it Fran or Miriam? Asked the audience. You already knew about debt-based money before you came here, but there was a point where you didn't know about debt-based money, and there was the light bulb. And so journalists are no smarter than the rest of us, and some would argue, uncharitably, that they're somewhat more stupid, possibly, than the rest of us, but there you are. That's the first one. Journalists tend to flock to those in power. Media stories are about powerful people. You don't hear many media stories about the person cleaning the street or the person giving you a Starbucks coffee or whatever it is. We journalists go to celebrity, we go to power. That's what journalism has a tendency to do. I'm not saying it's the right thing, but that is what happens. And one of the consequences of that is that the people in power, and I mean not just power as in prime ministerial power, but also power as in huge amounts of wealth power, which is not necessarily expressed in a formal position, but it's certainly expressed in a bank account and a tax haven property, probably. But it's not in the interest of these people to talk to journalists about how money is really made and the consequences of that. So why the media don't understand money. It's not in the interests of the people that they spend their time trying to court that the journalists understand it. I sort of touched on that a little bit in my own personal experience. They're under no pressure to understand. Their editors are not saying, come on, Patrick, tell me, what's this money business? Because their editors don't understand either. So there's no pressure for them to find out. And again, so why bother? You've got a lot of work to do anyway. Get on with it. Equally, in terms of the audience of these journalists, the audience isn't clamoring to understand where money comes from, because they may not, like you, they may not yet have realized why that would be important, or even they don't even know that they don't know. So that's another reason. Journalists are under no pressure to understand. There's a book by a great journalist. I'm a media critic. I can't conceal it. But there are some fantastic journalists out there. And one of them is a real hero of mine, a fellow called Nick Davies. He works at The Guardian. He's the man who really single-handedly is responsible for Leveson having taken place. He was indefatigable in chasing the phone hacking story, and he wrote a book called Flat Earth News. And in that book, he talks about churnalism. That's not his term. He took it from someone else, and he credits them. But churnalism is you are understaffed, you are under pressure, you are under deadline. Get the bloody thing out, basically. So write fast, take the press release in, get the quote from the serving politician, the opposition politician, the economist, the analyst, and maybe someone in the street, and your job's done, get it out there. It doesn't lend itself to deep thought, doesn't lend itself to contrarianism or taking a view which is out there and risky. So they're understaffed, and that is true, and it's getting worse. Journalists as a species are pack animals. I don't know if anyone's read Evelyn Waugh's Scoop. It's well worth it, very funny, and it has examples of journalists as pack animals. They hunt in packs, they like to pretend they're different, but you look across the front page headlines any day and you see the evidence of journalists as pack animals. Often it's the same story. Journalists have their own ideology, which is often the ideology of their editors, their publications, the society as a whole. And the last 30 years, for better or worse, for Conservative or for Labour, frankly, and Lib Dem, is free market. Free market, obviously, with a health warning, i.e. it's not really free at all. But free market in terms of how it's liked, how people like to paint it, who benefit from it. But the ideology of journalists is stuck in this free market sense, i.e. free market good, not free market bad. And the idea that regulation is a bad thing, so we must get rid of it all. And so the ideology plays through everything, which is if the CBI says we need to get rid of red tape, journalists sort of cover the story without any critical sense of what does it matter if there's no health and safety coverage for a chainsaw, for example. Deregulate it and cut your foot off, sort of thing. Fear of backlash, flack, I put in brackets. If you, Julian Assange at the moment in the Ecuadorian embassy, he's not strictly a journalist, although for me he has many, many journalistic elements. And he can tell you a bit about flack. And it's backlash for having stuck your neck out with the truth. It's not great. Andrew Gilligan at the BBC, he made a few minor journalistic missteps in his work for which he has been trashed. But ultimately what he was saying was bang on the money. So flack, Andrew Gilligan can also tell you about that. So there are other reasons. I'm sure you could probably throw a few at me. Some of those are more important than others. There's a book by Noam Chomsky and Ed Herman, which is called Manufacturing Consent. Talks about news filters, talks about the ownership of media organizations, the income of media organizations, ideology it touches on, flack it touches on, and there's another one, but it may be included in there, I can't remember. But there are a lot of reasons why media don't get what Positive Money is talking about. And I'm going to permit myself, very briefly, a very quick bit on response. And I'm aware of the time, so I'm going to go through these slides very quickly. The first one, what we can do, conventional media. Monitor them, critique errors and omissions, lobby to improve coverage, and find and share better alternative media. And I realize that you should never do this in a presentation, rip through a slide like that, but I'm going to beg your indulgence. And the second one, what we can do too, we the media, which is you basically, self-educate, which you clearly are doing, stage film screenings and debates where you live. I live in southwest France. I do that, and next month's February screening is about money. It's not the first one, we've done a couple of other ones. Champion local innovation, that means real-world experiments, time banks, alternative money credit unions, and citizen journalism. I learn how to be the media yourself. If the media is so bad, and they are, do it yourself. It's possible, and train others to do it too. That's it. This is who I am. Chapter 3 of this book, Fraudcast News, which is my sort of mea culpa with Reuters and what I think can be done. Chapter 3 in that is the fear and greed correspondent, which is me writing for Reuters as the, first of all, the commodities, precious metals correspondent, and then the FTSE correspondent. You can get that for free, that book, as a downloadable free PDF. It puts the broader picture of not just positive money, but actually environmental issues, globalization problems, civil disobedience in the face of failed governance, and makes the point about the relationship between journalism and governance. Really, the only point of journalism is to serve society, and that's not how it's set up. It's normally to sell advertising or copies of your organ. So you can download that there. The final thing is, I'd like to say thank you to Positive Money. I think the way that they are approaching this is spectacularly powerful. And the reason I come to Positive Money rather than go to a climate organization is because it is the root of the problem, alongside a couple of others, but it is incredibly important work. So that's all I have to say.
Do you think that one of the main factors in why both academics and journalists don't get this is because a lot of academics and journalists are people from certain backgrounds and certain places in society? They're often people with a certain amount of privilege. I say this because, for example, half my family is from Sudan, and I have two cousins, one of whom's older, one of whom's younger. Both of them have studied economics. And it was only once they started doing their own research projects on local issues that they started realizing how sort of unhelpful what they'd actually studied was. So is that a major factor, the fact that the people who have the loudest voices are often the people who aren't affected the most?
Thank you. So the question of privilege in journalism. I think the short answer is definitely. The slightly longer answer is that journalists tend to be male, they tend to be white, they tend to be middle-aged, they tend to be middle class or upper class, they tend to be Caucasian, they tend to be heterosexual. So guilty is charged on all of those. It also helps if you're slightly balding as well. And glasses. So orange jumpers.
But not jumpsuits.
No, not jumpsuits. So that is the case. I mean it. And the answer, and there is an answer, and it is a happy answer, which is the age of the internet and technology, the good part of that is citizen journalism. And you need to learn it. You need to teach it to other people. There are two great books by the same person on that subject. One is called We the Media. The other one is a subsequent book by the same person called Media-active. It's a made-up word, Media-active. The fellow is called Dan Gilmore, Gillmor. You can download for free both books, or you can pay him money. Excellent publications. So yes, we are all those things. It is a huge problem in the conventional media, which is why I advocate alternative citizen media and real journalism.